Hi, this is Chris Young. Welcome to episode 19 of Contemplating Life. This week we continue our series of episodes on my experiences growing up in a special education school. We talk about my experience moving from 5th to 6th grades and my first genuine interest in girls. We've talked in previous episodes about my so-called girlfriends in kindergarten and later in 4th grade, but at that young age, I really had no idea what it meant to have a girlfriend or to be a boyfriend. However, at the early age of 10, it began to get real. Well, as real as it can for a 10-year-old. A girl named Lily had a genuine crush on me. She was in Robert's school because she had a heart condition. As I explained in previous episodes, many of the kids really didn't need to be in a special ed school. Anything that was serious enough to get you out of gym class or to restrict your activities on the playground would get you shipped off to the handicapped ghetto. Lily would shower attention on me, carrying my books, helping me with my coat, and before I had my power wheelchair, she would push me to and from lunch. I suspect she was a bit disappointed I got the power chair because in some ways it put her out of a job. Still, she could see how happy I was to have the new chair. How bad did Lily have a crush on me? She would take a piece of paper and practice writing her name as Lily Young. She showed me a math paper that she accidentally wrote Lily Young at the top of it. She said she came close to turning it in before she caught the mistake. I wasn't exactly smitten with her, but I really did like her. She was reasonably cute, and at age 11 was already starting to develop a figure, although she was a little bit plump. Most of all, I enjoyed the attention she gave me, and I did what I could to encourage it. We never held hands or talked about kissing, let alone trying to do it. I don't recall talking to her on the phone, although a couple of years later, she called me just to see how I was doing, so we must have exchanged phone numbers at some point. I'm pretty sure that by the end of the school year, she already knew she would be attending regular school the following year. I knew I was going to miss having her around and all the attention she gave me, but I wasn't exactly heartbroken. A lot of kids who didn't belong in Robert's school left after 5th grade. Grades 6 through 8 were considered junior high, which today we would probably call middle school. Although Robert's junior high program wasn't half bad, it had nowhere near the opportunities that a regular school would have. The transition from 5th to 6th grade also meant moving upstairs. By then, I had mastered navigating the big ramp and enjoyed going up and down every day. It was no longer that terrifying experience it had been the first time down. In junior high, we had a homeroom where we had English, which included spelling, grammar, and literature. The 6th grade homeroom teacher, Mr. Ron Cole, taught social studies for all 3 grades. The 7th grade teacher, Mrs. Irene McBurney, taught science and music. The 8th grade teacher, Miss Meta Fogus, taught math. We also shared a shop teacher and a home ec teacher with the high school. There was also an art teacher who was in the building 1 or 2 days a week and would rotate with other schools. We would spend most of the day in our homeroom, but would rotate to the other rooms for science, music, and math. It probably would have been easier to just have the teachers switch rooms and leave all of us in the room we started in. But something about the idea of switching from classroom to classroom made it feel more like a regular school. Also, we did have a small amount of lab equipment in the 7th grade science room, and of course we had to switch rooms for shop and home ec. In shop class, we did some woodworking projects, like making lamps or wall decorations, and we spent some time learning mechanical drawing, which I really liked. If we had had CAD software in those days, I might have taken up drafting or architecture as a career. The problem was I couldn't handle any drawing bigger than an ordinary sheet of paper, so a full-size blueprint would have been outside my capability. The girls did cooking and sewing in a home ec class. My sixth-grade homeroom teacher, Mr. Cole, was a jolly fellow who stood about 5 feet tall and was totally bald. He was a lot of fun, but if you got in trouble too often, he could really be tough. One time when the class had been getting especially rowdy, he imposed on us what he called the week, in which he was no more Mr. Nice Guy. For a full week, he was very grumpy and clamped down on us really hard. We got the message. We could have fun in his class, but there were limits, and he could take away all the fun at a minute's notice. Like Miss Holmes and Mr. Wright in the 3rd and 4th grades, he recognized how bright I was, and I quickly became his favorite. Of course, he also realized how lazy I was, and was quick to give me all those speeches about you're not living up to your potential, blah, 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 blah. He was the teacher I spoke of earlier who tried to trick me into joining the spelling bee by appealing to my competitive nature and the ego. He was that teacher I spoke of earlier who tried to trick me into joining the spelling bee by appealing to my competitive nature and my ego about my intellect. It didn't work. I had acquired a passion for politics from my mother, and that passion was further fueled by his social studies class. Junior high was from 1966 through 69, so it was an exciting time at the height of the Vietnam War and all the social unrest regarding that, as well as the civil rights movement. He told us one time someone asked him if segregationist Alabama Governor George Wallace ever died, would he go spit on his grave? He told them, I promised myself when I was in the Army I would never stand in line again. He'd been stationed in Germany, but it was only after the end of World War II. He still had lots of stories about his time in Europe in the service. I remember how surprised he was when President Johnson announced,
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
Mr. Cole had assured us that Johnson would be president again, and we teased him pretty hard the next day after LBJ announced he was out. Although Mr. Cole refused to identify as Democrat or Republican, it was obvious he was a liberal, especially on social justice issues. He was Catholic and probably quite pro-life. He and his wife were unable to have children, so they adopted a daughter. She was about the same age as my adopted sister, Carol, so he and my mom shared a bond. I reconnected with him later on Facebook, but I don't recall when he died. I doubt that he lived to see the Trump presidency, but I'm certain that if he had, even if he had become more conservative, he would have been appalled by the politics today and the assault on democracy. There was something very important missing from my sixth grade experience. Girls. It wasn't just Lily who left Robert's school after fifth grade. All of the girls either moved out of town or started going to regular school. It just so happened there were no handicapped girls our age anywhere in the city of Indianapolis that particular year. But we did get some excitement for about 6 weeks. A girl came to our school. I don't remember her name all these years later. She was a very attractive blonde with a great personality. She described herself as a tomboy, but her evidence was she had fallen out of a tree and broken her leg. She was only going to be in the wheelchair at Roberts for about 6 weeks until her leg healed. That was enough time for my friend Ted Hayes to go nuts over her, but I don't think he ever got anywhere. I and the rest of the guys were content just to tease her about whatever we could. At age 11, we still weren't quite girl crazy yet. Years later, I was in the cafeteria at IUPUI. An absolutely stunning blonde woman walked up to me. She was a nursing student. She asked, "Do you remember me?" It was the tomboy from 6th grade. Unfortunately, I was sitting there talking to a girl named Ellie, who you'll hear much about in future episodes. If I hadn't been with Ellie, I would have gotten the nurse's phone number just to see what might happen. This wasn't the only time that fate sent me a potential girlfriend while I was in the middle of pursuing someone else. Sometimes I would pray, "Come on, God, you give me these long droughts with no women in my life, and then you send me two at once. Can't we get better timing?" My all-male class continued through 6th grade and a couple of months into 7th grade. Then we heard we were getting a new girl at last. She was a very sweet African-American girl named Donna. I think she had a heart condition or asthma or something that didn't put her in a wheelchair. All the black guys chased her, but they never got anywhere. I think it was in February or March of 7th grade. One day we were in the 8th grade room at math class, and word got around we were getting a new girl. As I rolled into homeroom after math, I headed for my desk. The students in wheelchairs sat at custom-built tables designed for two wheelchairs side by side. They had plenty of clearance underneath for wheelchair footrests, and there was a shelf below the table where you could stash your books. The height was perfect for someone sitting in a wheelchair. We had an odd number of wheelchair students, and considering I was continuing my role as a teacher's pet, I was awarded the privilege of an entire desk to myself. The new girl was sitting there in her wheelchair at my desk. My initial reaction was, "Oh, crap, no. I'm going to have to share a desk with some girl?" Then I saw the girl. Now it was, "Oh, holy shit. I got to make sure I sit next to this girl." Sitting there in front of me was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in a wheelchair. She had sandy blonde, shoulder-length hair, blue eyes, a broad smile, and high cheekbones like some Scandinavian high-fashion model. She was wearing a pink sweater over a white blouse, a gray pleated skirt, white bobby socks, and penny loafers. I was totally smitten. In addition to the normal wheelchair desks, we had ordinary school desks, but the chairs were not attached. You could sit at one of them in a wheelchair, although they might be a little bit low. At one point, it looked like Mrs. McBurney was going to sit her at one of these single desks. I spoke up immediately and insisted I didn't mind sharing my wheelchair desk with her. Fortunately, I got my way, and she was assigned to the other half of my desk. The teacher had been talking to the girl's mother. The teacher then introduced her to everyone as Rose Ellen Schumann. At first, I wasn't sure if Rose Ellen was one word or two. Her mother called her Rose Ellen, and when the teacher began referring to her as Rose Ellen, you could see her cringe. It didn't take long to understand. She wanted to drop the middle name and just be called Rose. Initially, she was quite shy, which is to be expected coming to a new school and not knowing anyone. However, she wasn't shy about answering questions in class. She was smart. I noticed she was constantly flipping to the back of the book and looking at the glossary to find the answers to questions. That was something I was too lazy to do. Priding myself in being a know-it-all, I had the attitude that if you had to look something up, it was an admission of failure. But I gave her points for being clever enough to be able to look something up before the rest of the idiots in class could prove their ignorance and give a wrong answer. It didn't take long for all the other guys to know I was first in line to get her attention. I didn't have any competition. The next question was, what's next? How do I get her attention? How do I show her my intentions? I was a clueless 12-year-old. Someone suggested that the first good step was to buy her a friendship ring. That would be a challenge. I couldn't exactly save up money for my paper route, hop on my bicycle, and ride to the store. One day there was about $10 or $15 just lying around on the top of our TV. I figured they'd paid the paper boy with a $20 bill, and this was the change. My problem was it was sitting too far back for me to reach. I asked my sister Carol, who would have been about 4 years old at the time, to hand it to me. Then I had to figure out an excuse to get to the store. There was a discount department store called Airway on Lafayette Road. It was the 1960s equivalent of a Kmart or a Walmart. I knew they had a jewelry counter full of cheap costume jewelry, and I hoped I could find something there. Before I could hatch a plan, I got caught. My parents confronted me and asked if I took the money. I confessed. When they asked why, I said I wanted to buy a model car kit to build. I said I was going to ask them to take me to Airway to buy it. They told me if I needed money in the future, they'd give it to me. They took me to the store, but I didn't have the money with me anymore. I picked out a car kit, and they paid for it. Eventually, I had a couple of bucks for my grandma, and I traded that, along with the promise of all my desserts at lunch for a week, to my friend Teddy. He had a cheap friendship ring. It was a metal band with hearts all around it. I wrote a mushy love letter to Rose, put it in an envelope with the ring, and handed it to her on the way out the door at the end of school on a Friday. Monday, at the end of the day, she handed me a note on the way out the door. She said she didn't want to go steady with me. She wasn't interested. She already had a boyfriend who lived in her neighborhood. She concluded with the sentence, "So what if I am cute?" Naturally, I was pretty crushed. My only consolation was that once I told all the guys she already had a boyfriend, none of them tried to step in where I'd failed. I always had the hope that the situation would change, and I would try again. Throughout the rest of 7th grade and 8th grade, I just had to bide my time. Eventually, Rose warmed up and became just another one of the gang. We all enjoyed teasing one another. I wrote that if our desks still had inkwells like in the olden days, we would have been trying to dip her ponytail into it. Rose liked to show off that she could pop a wheelie in her wheelchair and balance on her rear wheels. It took her a while to realize that we all enjoyed her balancing skills so much because it allowed us to look up her skirt. After that, she never did it again. My next chance to get her attention came on Valentine's Day in 8th grade. The PTA always threw us a party on Valentine's Day. The room mothers would bake heart-shaped cookies covered in bright red icing, and they would serve punch. You'd buy a package of mixed Valentines and give one to everyone in your class, including guys sending to guys and girls to girls. You had to choose carefully so that the same-sex cards were more friendly than romantic. I carefully sorted through the package that my mom got for me, and I picked out the mushiest one for Rose. In 8th grade, I wasn't sharing a desk with her anymore. I shared one with my best buddy, Miguel Mike Rodriguez. Rose sat at a single desk directly in front of us. At the Valentine's party, I leaned over to Mike and whispered, "I gotta keep an eye on Rose. I sent her a particularly mushy one. I want to see how she reacts." He gave me a thumbs up and whispered back, "Good luck, bro." Rose opened my card, read it, and then turned around and looked at me and said, "Do you mean it?" I nearly choked on my Brock's candy conversation heart. I said, What? "Do you really mean it? what it says on the card. Now, the obvious response would have been, of course I meant it. I picked out that card just special for you. That's not what I said. Instead, I said, I forget what it says. She rolled her eyes in disbelief and then held up the card so I could read it. Satisfied that it reflected my intent, as best an out-of-the-box Valentine card could do so, I finally said with belated confidence, "Yeah, I meant it." She smiled, but I think mostly it was her laughing at what an idiot I was. Meanwhile, Mike was laughing so hard, he's got his head down on the table, pounding his fist. I was worried he was going to fall out of his wheelchair. He was laughing so hard. I probably turned the same shade of red as those heart-shaped cookies we'd been eating. In our next episode, we'll continue the saga of my romance with Rose and some other darker stories about my days at Robert's school. If you find this podcast educational, entertaining, enlightening, or even inspiring, consider sponsoring me on Patreon for just $5 a month. You'll get early access to the podcast and any other benefits I might come up with down the road. It's not that I'm desperate for money, but a little extra income sure could help. Many thanks to my Patreon supporters. It's not just so much the money, but it's that you care enough that you want to support me. It keeps me encouraged that I'm doing something useful. Even if you can't provide financial support, please, please, please post links and share this podcast on social media so I can grow my audience. I'll see you next week as we continue contemplating life. Until then, fly safe.